Sanctuary of the Shadow is a 2024 Romantasy novel by Aurora Ascher. I remember when this book came out. It was put out by Red Tower Books, which is the same publisher as Fourth Wing, so this book created a bit of a stir when it was announced. I think a lot of Romantasy lovers took one look at the gorgeous cover and sprayed edges coming from a publisher that had already delivered them a banger and said, sold. Then the book came out. I might have mentioned before on this channel that I have a tendency to look at negative reviews for popular books. It's kind of a odd little hobby of mine. And I remember checking the Goodreads reviews for this one a little bit after it came out, and it didn't go over too well. I was really surprised by how bad the rating was. In my eyes, when a Goodreads review is about 3.4 and above or so, you're dealing with primarily mixed to positive reviews. When you start seeing it sink beneath that, you're dealing with mixed to negative reviews. Get under a 3-star rating and you are really hurting for good reviews. You might have a couple in there, but predominantly they're either very middling or they're sinking lower and lower. This rating is a result of over 11,000 people reading it, so I think it's a good sample size indicating how most people are responding to the book. Naturally, I became curious. I've said this before on here. I am not a Romantasy girly, and though I've read Fourth Wing and thought it was okay for what it was, I genuinely do not understand the hype behind it. So I was curious as to what was making the target audience for Sanctuary of the Shadow really dislike a book that theoretically should have been a hit with them. And since there were plenty of copies left of that sprayed edges version, I picked one up from my local store and decided to give it a read. The world this story takes place in is not super well developed, so there might be some holes here, but the basics are this. The world is full of humans and elementals. Elementals are effectively immortal, or long-living, at least, I don't know, beings capable of a variety of powers depending on what exactly they are. They were given these powers by the elemental queens, each of which represents a specific element. Queen Fury is the fire queen, Queen Daria is the water queen, Queen Audra is the air queen, Queen Tiara is the earth queen, and Queen Nashira is queen of the ether? Okay, whatever. The queens are notoriously volatile and cause a lot of problems, so elementals are often persecuted for being the creations of the queens. The story starts with Harrow, who is the last survivor of the Seers, who are water elementals. She's a little psychic, she can sense things about people's souls, she gets visions of the future, she can scry, and when she was a child, the Seers were wiped out by Queen Fury's wraiths as revenge for some dispute with Daria that got her lover killed. We'll get into that later. Anyway, the wraiths wipe out all the Seers, though Harrow is spared by the one who killed her clan. Harrow is a member of a traveling circus run by Salazar, the ringmaster, who took her in after the massacre. Other notable people in the circus are Mal, Harrow's half-panther elemental friend, and Lauren, a human orphan taken in by Salazar as well. Harrow posed as a human for the 50 years or so since she was taken in, and alleges that no one in the circus knows because they don't know that much about humans and the human aging process. Which really doesn't make sense because Lauren is right there and they're watching him age, so they could absolutely tell that Harrow did not age as quickly as him. Eventually, when it's revealed that Harrow is an elemental, absolutely no one is surprised, and Harrow figures they must have all suspected. Harrow is not very bright. I'm just gonna be real with you from the get-go. You might say she's a few clowns short of a circus. But soon after we meet Harrow, we also meet Wraith. Wraith just kind of pops up in the desert, fucked up and alone with no memories to speak of. We do get told that he feels weirdly confined in his body, like he's not accustomed to having a physical form. We also find out that he can change his appearance at will, though his natural state is black eyes with fiery irises, big leathery wings, and skin that is described as like a shadow, but empty of all shade and tone. It was darkness without depth, a void that absorbed light like a sponge. I feel the need to quote this directly so that you understand that Wraith is not being described as what we would in the real world refer to as a dark-skinned person. The shade of his skin is specifically described as being supernaturally dark. Wraith is captured by traders that sell him to Salazar, who immediately pegs him as a wraith. He fucking hates wraiths because they're murderous evil monsters and decides he's going to make some money off of this one by displaying it in his circus. He also has an ulterior motive. He's trying to capture Wraith for Queen Daria, but again, we're going to get into that later. Wraiths, as I mentioned before, were created by the Fire Queen. hellish assassins that effectively committed gigantic mass murder I think the word that starts with geno and ends with the suffix side is one of those words that YouTube might nuke a video over, so I'm being very careful here. Against the seers. But they're so rare that a lot of people think they don't even exist. This becomes a point of contention between Harrow and Salazar because naturally our protagonist finds Wraith locked in a cage and starts getting cozy with him. Wraith, by the way, it occurs to me I've used his name and the word Wraith interchangeably for the last several paragraphs. He gets his name because Lauren misspelled Wraith on the cage's sign. It's Wraith without the W at the beginning. So Raith. Salazar insists that Wraith is, in fact, a Wraith with a W. Harrow insists that he is not because she can sense with her water magic that he's never killed anyone before and also that he isn't evil. At this point, I feel it's important to go over the details of what a Wraith is in the context of this universe. Wraiths have the following: supernaturally dark skin, black eyes with fiery irises, although they don't specify that in this, big leathery wings, claws, no corporeal form, and also they're murderous nightmare monsters. Now here's the rub of it. Wraith has changed his appearance, so Harrow hasn't seen the wings and skin at the time of this conversation, I believe. She knows about the eyes and claws, but she hasn't really seen his full true form yet, so I can't really hold this against her. He has a corporeal form. She can't sense evil or a history of murder in his soul, ergo Harrow concludes that Wraith is not actually a Wraith. I said that Harrow is a few clowns short of a circus, but I do have to give it to her that this conclusion was not the dumbest one she could have reached. That comes later. So Harrow ends up escaping with Wraith and Mal so that Wraith isn't exploited or harmed by Salazar anymore. Except that in the process of escaping, Harrow gets clued into Wraith's actual appearance, as well as the fact that he is significantly more murderous than she realized. She literally has to drag him away from murdering Salazar and Lauren. They get to an underground inn, and she finally acknowledges that, yeah, okay, you definitely hit most of those bullet points on the checklist for a Wraith. Naturally, this is when they both decide to play a game of Naked Twister, if you get my meaning. Yeah, so Harrow's attitude is, alright, so you strongly resemble one of the unholy demon monsters that wipe my people off the face of the earth, including my mom, but you're nice. So, 8 pages of shamoing boing. To elaborate, Harrow is kind of implied to be deliberately, I say implied, it's not subtle at all. She flat out says that she's basically ignoring a bunch of gigantic red flags here. Like, she recognizes that there are some strong indicators that Wraith is in fact a Wraith, and she's just kind of like, I'm just not gonna think about that right now. Wild! Couldn't be me! Moving on. Mal heads back to the circus and Salazar is pissed. He tells her flat out that he's an emissary for Queen Audra, the Air Queen, and that this means he was helping Queen Daria out? For some reason, I don't know, because she captured a Wraith and was experimenting on it to figure out how to make them vulnerable enough to kill. And she succeeded, but her test subject disappeared, got blown halfway across the world once she succeeded. I don't know. Mal is horrified to realize that she helped Harrow escape with an actual Wraith. Cut back to Harrow and Wraith for more Bing Bong! I'm not kidding. There's about 15 pages in the middle of this book dedicated to pure Bing Bong, while Harrow and Wraith are hiding in that underground tavern. Eventually, Queen Daria, psychically contacts Harrow and says that she deliberately murdered Queen Fury's mate, which is what kicked off the eradication of the Seers. She reveals that Wraith is, surprise, actually a Wraith, and it was her that gave him a physical form by combining her water magic with Fury's fire magic, which absolutely makes logical sense for how that would create a physical being, but I'm not going to question the logic. She also drops the knowledge that he is the Wraith that murdered Harrow's entire clan, including her mom, and spared her life as a child. Which was, for me, not the most earth-shattering reveal. I'm gonna be 100% with you. I'm gonna get into it further later on, but I literally came to this conclusion the moment Harrow revealed that the Wraith that killed her clan spared her. I'm like, it's Wraith. It's him. It's fucking him. They're gonna make it him. I know they're gonna make it him. Moving on. But Harrow's pissed, understandably, and she instantly turns her back on Wraith and runs back to the circus. Wraith regains his memories of being a Wraith, gets found and attacked by Salazar, then escapes and decides, fuck Queen Fury, I'm gonna murk this bitch. Harrow and Maul get brought to Queen Nashira of the Ether, who reveals that Wraiths are not evil murderous monsters. They just have to be that way because of Queen Fury. They are so tormented and warped by her that they don't have a choice about committing mass murder, except when they do. So isn't Harrow just such a bitch for ditching poor, tortured Wraith? Harrow is distraught. Cruel Harrow! You abandoned Wraith? Oh, jail for Harrow! Jail for Harrow for 1,000 years! She must grovel at Wraith's feet to atone for this truly unforgivable betrayal. She abandoned a Wraith that she fell madly in love with in less than a month after finding out that he murdered her mother! What a bitch she is for kicking his ass to the curb! Put a pin in it. Put a pin in it. We're gonna come back to this. Boy, are we gonna come back to this. I have a lot to say about this. So Harrow wants to go to Wraith. Nashira says it's too late. Wraith has to come to her. She says this like 20 fucking times, but Harrow is a super bad listener, so she wants to go save Wraith. Daria pops up again, and Harrow's all pissed like, you betrayed me! Except she really didn't. She absolutely told the truth about Wraith murdering Harrow's mom and clan, and she was absolutely correct that maybe Harrow shouldn't be around him. But now Daria's all like, well, that was before I knew you loved him, so now I want to help you get him back. Okay. Meanwhile, Wraith goes to fuck up Queen Fury. He goes into her castle, frees the other Wraiths from the the jars, the fucking mason jars that she keeps them in. This book is a fucking adventure, let me tell you. So he goes to kill Queen Fury and fails because she's, an immortal fucking fire queen that created him, and she proceeds to separate Wraith from the body Daria gave him. Now he's an evil monster Wraith again, and she makes him vow to kill Harrow. Oh no! Did I mention, by the way, I don't know that I mentioned this earlier. It was actually a fairly significant thing mentioned earlier. Wraiths are, their word is bond. They once they make someone a promise, they have to keep it, and this is because of the way that Queen Fury built them, basically. She basically wired them in such a way that they are compelled to obey her demands. Kinda. We're gonna get into it. Harrow is going to go find Wraith. She's traveling to go find him, and Wraith surprises Harrow in the ethereal forest that she's traveling through, a location that I am given no additional information about. And so he tries to kill her. But the power of love makes him hesitate, and Harrow is convinced that her beloved is about to spare her. Love conquers all! Except then those dumb bitches Daria and Maul come rushing in, see an extremely demonic-looking Wraith pinning Harrow to the ground, and they go, oh shit! And attack to save her life. What pieces of shit they are for saving Harrow's life instead of relying on the power of love to stop Wraith from mauling her! So Harrow's pissed, and I don't know. I was reading this at work, and there were machines banging around me, so I feel like maybe I might have missed something, but apparently Daria caught Wraith again during this process, and says, yay, I'm gonna give him his body back, but it's gonna be super painful, and also when I achieve this, it's going to cause him to get launched back into the desert, where he was originally found at some point, because why wouldn't it? So Harrow's not allowed to come around during this process, bye! So, Harrow takes off for the desert, and, smash cut to 6 months later. She finds Wraith, who's been magically tossed there by the power of obtaining a corporeal form again, with no memories. Harrow tells him the Cliff Notes version of the story that doesn't involve, oh, by the way, you're a murder monster that killed my mom bits. And then you know what they do? They play a game of hide the German sausage. That's what they fucking do. And then afterwards, Daria comes again, kind of psychically to scold Harrow for not telling Wraith the full truth, because now he's trapped in a nightmare of himself accidentally killing Harrow over and over again. Then he wakes up and remembers everything, and Harrow simpers about how it totally doesn't matter that he murdered her mom and entire clan, and they're cool now, and the power of love, and blah, 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 blah. Smash cut. Harrow finds out she's pregnant. Then another smash cut to a year later has the two of them back at the circus with their baby daughter. Also, apparently, the remaining queens came together to bind Fury's powers, but hey, that's a little too exciting a story for this book, so it all happens off screen. Cut to black, that's the end of the story, except for the sequel in the process that's going to be about Maul going back to her homeland and probably playing a rousing game of Doctor with that snake hybrid she's been making eyes at over the course of this book. So, that was an experience. The writing was not good, in my opinion. Very amateurish. Which is interesting because this is actually not Aurora Ascher's first book. She has another series called Hellbent, the first of which has a 3.7 rating with over 9,000 ratings contributing to that average. So clearly that book in series was better received than this one. In fairness, that one seems like a story set in the normal world, but with demons, and I think a chunk of the issues with this book stem from a lack of skill in developing an alternate fantasy world with its own history and vibe. The problem with the writing in this book was just an absolute absence of subtlety. None to be found. The info dumping was egregious. Salazar explains to Lauren outright what wraiths are. Then he explains to Maul why it is that Wraith is definitely one of them. Then this gang of elemental hybrids sits down with Maul and explains how damn near every single detail of Harrow and Wraith's escape from the circus has somehow made it to the general populace. Then Daria sits down and explains the exact same thing that Salazar did to Lauren to Harrow. The number of times in my notes where I just wrote more goddamn exposition for fuck's sake is ridiculous. Listen, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Showing and telling is a careful balance. Often it's better to show, but sometimes it's more prudent to just have a character explain something in one paragraph instead of dragging something out over 40 pages. The ideal scenario is that you've created a story that is subtle in all the right ways, but also not frustratingly vague or confusing for the reader. You want them to have a basic sense of what's going on, but not so much that it removes any sense of mystery or anticipation about what's going to happen next. This book went all in on telling. The characters turn to one another, and consequently the audience, and just explain everything straightforwardly. There was no subtlety, there is no hidden meaning, there is very little left up to the imagination, except for that which the author did not think through, which is something I'm going to be touching upon later on. The issue with a lack of subtlety in a book is that it makes things predictable. Everyone told me what a Wraith was, so I saw it coming from a mile away that Wraith was going to be one. Harrow fell in love with Wraith immediately and then abandoned him halfway through the book, so I knew there was going to be more of the story about the nature of his culpability in her mother and clan's death. I saw pretty much everything coming. The only prediction I had that didn't come true was that Salazar was Harrow's dad. I was convinced for most of the book he was, given how extremely pissed off he was about the massacre. That was one twist that never came. The other thing I want to point out, too, is how not a lot happens in this story. Go back and listen to the recap again if you need an understanding of this. Okay, we start off with Harrow at the circus. Wraith's in the desert. He gets sold to the circus. They're at the circus together. Then they go to the tavern. Harrow goes back to the circus. Wraith goes to kill Queen Fury. Then Harrow goes traveling to go find Wraith. And then he finds her. And then they're back at the circus again. And then Harrow goes to the desert to find Wraith, and then she finds him, and then they're back at the circus again. I cannot stress enough that what I've just described here is all of the locations that happened in this story. I need you to understand that in my recap, when I'm recapping the sequence of events in this story, I really didn't leave much out. I really did not leave out any crucial plot points. I kind of skimped a little bit on Maul getting meeting up with the Ouroboros clan, or something like that. They're the hybrids. It's the snake hybrid I mentioned that she's gonna shaboing boing in the next book. I skimped a little bit on that scene because it really didn't make that much difference on the plot. But there's not a whole lot that happens in this story, except for shaboing boing. This was not a well-crafted fantasy story. There was not a lot of stuff in this thing that I think is really going to satisfy fantasy fans, which is part of the reason I think that this book did not do very well. Otherwise, the amount of sitting down and telling a story in this book would have been somewhat forgivable if they were all giving wildly different stories from one another, because then we introduce ambiguity. Who's telling the truth and who isn't? It builds mystery and suspense. But nope, everything that's explained to us in this novel ends up being basically accurate, with the exception of Daria's culpability in pissing off Fury, which kicks off the eradication of the Seers. On that note, I'm actually going to read this passage to you because I want to make a point about it. I actually want to make a couple points about it. This is page 208, and the preface is that Daria is going to tell a story about the night she killed her sister's mate. I know this story, I think. Harrow shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Everyone does. Fury's mate attacked a village in your territory, and when you retaliated, he was killed. Daria looked away. That is what happened, to a point. Was that guilt in her expression? Was it on purpose? Her, Daria's, silver eyes flashed. What do you think? Harrow studied her closely. The queens could be benevolent goddesses one day and fickle, ruthless tyrants the next. I've heard tales that Fury's mate was blood-crazed, obsessed with warring. I was told that Fury was the senseless one who hungered for power and preyed on innocents. But that's not true, is it? I think you were sick of defending your borders from the constant threat of invasion. You killed him on purpose and tried to make it look like an accident. As the truth sank in, her heart broke all over again. This was the real reason she'd lost her people. Daria was not a protector, but the aggressor in a war that had plunged the world into a dark age. Okay, so a few things about this passage. One, Harrow only figures this out because the author needs her to do. If she tapped into the water, which is, again, where she gets her powers from, and also it almost acts as like a sentient force that tells her things a lot in this book. But if it had hinted the truth to her, I'd have been a little more forgiving and been like, okay, it's magic. But after 200 pages of Daddy, I love him! And constant attempts to dismiss and ignore the obvious fact that Wraith is, in fact, a Wraith, this sudden clarity and cleverness comes out of literally nowhere for me. She is not, in my opinion, written as a clever or even intelligent character. In fact, I would argue that she comes off as a bit foolish and incredibly short-sighted. Harrow is literally ignoring every single piece of information that would clue her into Wraith's true identity because she loves him, not considering that if he is a Wraith, she or other people might be in actual danger. 2, this is the real reason she'd lost her people. Comes across like I'm meant to feel like Fury is less culpable for ordering the extermination of an entire group of people because she was angry over her mate's death. And also that Wraith was less culpable for carrying out those orders. I cannot stress enough that this was not her sending an army into Daria's territory and just not caring who died. It was a targeted extermination of the seers. It is explicitly referred to in the book as that word that begins with a geno and ends with the suffix side, which I cannot say because I think YouTube will nuke my video. So we're not talking about like a war that had casualties. We're talking about targeted extermination. Daria's reckless disregard for potential consequences for her people is worthy of criticism. She was a piece of shit for what she did. But Fury literally ordered mass murder of a specific group, and Wraith was one of the ones who carried it out. 3, this entire passage is presented as though it's meant to be some dramatic revelation that changes our understanding of Queen Daria, except it really doesn't. Daria is barely developed as a character in her own right prior to this point. We've heard so little about her character that when it's revealed that she's a piece of shit, it's just kind of like, okay, cool story. You never gave me enough information to believe she was anything but. All I've been told about the Elemental Queens is how awful and volatile and shitty they are to people, so this kind of fits perfectly. I mentioned this in the recap, but yeah, saw that Wraith was indeed the Wraith that spared Harrow's life coming from a mile away. More specifically, about 80 pages away. In my notes for this reveal, I literally wrote, "Of course it was Wraith, you fucking ding-a-ling!" Because, sweet Christ, it was obvious. Not necessarily to Harrow, okay? In fairness, Harrow did not have all the information I had at that point. But to the audience, it was pretty fucking obvious. Anyway, the writing lacked subtlety. Everything is explained in the most straightforward and non-ambiguous way, and it removes any mystery this book might have had. I already see where we're going, and sometimes that's okay to see where we're going if you're enjoying the ride, but I didn't. This book, in my opinion, comes off as the first book of a very new writer who has not had a lot of writing experience, despite the fact that I know she's written other books. The characterization for the characters is very thin. Harrow is a seer who is guided by the water. She is a bland, nice girl. Not that bright. The only definable characteristic I can give her is that she's foolish and short-sighted, but I don't know that that was an intentional piece of characterization on the author's part. At one point, Maul characterizes Harrow as stubborn, but I'd call it more blind unwillingness to see a red flag even when the fabric's wrapped around her neck and literally choking her. I am still blown away by that scene where Daria and Maul see Wraith on top of Harrow, about to kill her, saving her ass, and then Harrow being mad that they didn't stand back and let true love save the day. That was fucking wild. Wraith is a Wraith without memories. He is angry and prone to violence, except when Harrow tells him not to. This is a trend I'm starting to notice in a lot of romantasy and romance books I'm dipping into. The main love interest is an evil dick, except when it's not convenient for him to be. Then he's nice, and he always bends to the female character in the most important matters. But beyond this, Wraith has no discernible personality. The cast of characters is paper thin. They are, in my opinion, completely forgettable. The author, in my opinion, does not know how to create unique voices for her characters, which is especially egregious because this book features rotating character perspectives. Rotating POVs is already tricky to pull off, but for someone who lacks the skill to create distinct, memorable characters, it just doesn't work. The world building in this book was patchwork and faint. I don't recall if we ever learned the name of the continent or country the story takes place in, honestly. We get the odd city or town name every now and then, but beyond that, not much. I know the elementals were created by the elemental queens, a bunch of catty bitches that have fucked up the world with their conflicts, and those conflicts are what has caused humans to hate elementals who were created by the queens. A quick side note, I generally don't wade into the modern language in a fantasy setting debate because, frankly, I don't think it matters. Authors can do whatever they want, and clearly the fan base of Fourth Wing at least doesn't give a shit. It's been well received, so clearly they don't. But aside from the swearing in this book, there were one or two other moments where the dialogue choices just kind of completely took me out of the story. Probably the best example, Queen Nashira says, "Ding, ding, ding," when Harrow reaches a correct conclusion. And I was just like, I'm sorry, are you kidding me? Why would she say ding, ding, ding? What point of reference would she have for using that terminology in a world without television or game shows? That's about it. The world building was bland and colorless. Again, this comes across as a lack of writing and storytelling skill. And listen, I swear I am not coming for Aurora Ascher when I say this. Skill can be developed. She can absolutely improve as a writer, and I'm sure she will. I'm just saying that from what I'm seeing of this book, her skills are underdeveloped, especially where fantasy writing is concerned. There are dozens of other specific critiques I have of this book, so I'll just try and go down the list for now. First, I want to address one consistent criticism of this book I saw prior to reading it, and that was the nature of Harrow and Wraith's relationship. I heard from several people, online and offline, that they considered the relationship to be problematic because Wraith is either described or depicted as being childlike, which brings up consent issues when he and Harrow eventually bing-bong each other. Having read the book, I disagree with this interpretation, but I do understand where it's coming from. I think that part of what spurred this criticism is two separate passages on pages 95 and 253. The first is where Harrow is describing Wraith to Maul, and I'll read it. "You know how I can read people. If I meet someone evil, I know. And I can always tell if someone is killed before. Taking a life leaves a scar on the spirit. The water senses it instantly. And you don't sense anything about Wraith," this is Maul talking. She shook her head. "The inclination for violence is there, but he's innocent. His spirit is squeaky clean. It's almost too clean. The only other time I've seen that is in children." "Children?" Maul lifted a brow. "But he's not." No, definitely not. But he has this purity about him, and he's totally clueless to the world. I know it sounds irrational, Maul, but I just need to do this." The second passage comes when Nashira is talking to Harrow and Maul. Wraith is brand new, like a child in many ways. She winked mischievously at Harrow, and yet decidedly not in others. Okay, now, I'll grant you, the wording is not great. Comparing a love interest to a child in an adult romantasy book where knob polishing is guaranteed to take place is going to send up a lot of red flags for people, and so it really is just best to maybe not do it if you want to avoid potentially triggering that type of criticism. However, I need to repeat, the author's writing skills, in my opinion, leave much to be desired. And so when evaluating the merits of this particular criticism, I have to take into consideration that poor writing and communication might be playing a role in why this criticism exists. So in evaluating this criticism, I have to ask two questions. The first question I asked myself was, is Wraith depicted as being childlike? And here, I'm defining childlike as naive, inexperienced, emotionally immature, or I guess just kind of impaired in such a way that impacts Wraith's ability to give consent. I'm also just kind of generally looking for any vibes he's giving off that say childish to me. My answer to this first question is no. Like many romantasy and romance books, Sanctuary of the Shadow splits itself between Wraith and Harrow's perspectives. And in reading Wraith's perspective, I do not see any indicators that he is a child or childlike, as I've defined above. He reads as an adult man with memory loss. I'll grant you that, as I said before, the characterization in this book is very, very thin and simplistic. So I can't really say much about Wraith's character traits beyond being a horny murder machine, but I can say with some confidence that I do not believe he is characterized as childlike. His internal narration is consistent with what I would expect from an adult character. I'm not getting child vibes from him. His social skills are okay. It's weird because he's not human and I have to make allowances for that. He's a wraith. But Wraith does display basic adult human social skills and characteristics. He is not naive. He has a different way of thinking from Harrow about murder and when it's acceptable primarily, but he isn't naive. I wouldn't call him emotionally immature. He's angry, but he's also capable of controlling it, particularly when Harrow makes it clear she doesn't like it. Particularly during the first sex scene, Wraith is cognizant of the fact that there are things that he wants to do to Harrow, but he recognizes that these are things that she may not want, and makes a point of asking if certain things are okay during the act. This suggests that he's not only capable of empathizing on an adult level, but also recognizes that failing to gain consent from Harrow would have consequences for their relationship. On that note, Wraith recognizes that he's horny for Harrow. The author makes it clear that he knows what that feeling means and comprehends what sexual attraction is, and even suspects that he's engaged in it before. He just doesn't remember any of his previous experiences with it. The other thing I want to point out, too, is that there are several passages throughout this book where the author seems to be making a point of belaboring the idea that Wraith is not a child. I feel like she kind of goes out of her way to emphasize that he is comprehending things. He knows what's going on around him. He's not naive. I think she may even say that flat out at one point. I forget where it is. Long story short, in my opinion, Wraith is not a child, nor is he childlike. He's not depicted as being a child. He's a non-human adult with memory loss. He's weird, but he is basically an adult. The second question I asked myself was, okay, but does Harrow believe that Wraith is childlike? Because if she views him that way, and she pursues him sexually, then yeah, I see the problem here. I know that Wraith's mentally an adult, albeit with some non-human peculiarities, but does she know that he's an adult in the ways that matter? I believe that Harrow perceives Wraith as an adult. If you pay attention to that first quote, you'll note that Harrow isn't comparing Wraith to a child. She's comparing his spirit to a child in the sense that it's squeaky clean. What she's saying, and what the author is not very subtly hinting to us, is that Wraith has a soul that is suspiciously clean for an adult, because she usually only sees them that clean when a person is a child. Then, of course, we have Maul, who comes right out and says children, but he's not, to which Harrow immediately clarifies that Wraith is not a child. Now, this is then complicated by then Harrow saying that Wraith is clueless to the world. However, I do think that that is her initial perception that changes once she lets Wraith out of the cage when they're escaping. Once she sees that Wraith is hell-bent on murdering Salazar, I think her perception of that, of him being clueless and innocent, changes a bit. I mean, innocent in the sense of like, oh, he's not a fucking murder machine. But I do think that her perception of him changes a little bit once she sees that he's ready, that he is so eager to go kill Salazar. Nishira essentially reiterates the idea of Wraith's soul being childlike or clean, but says that Wraith is like a child in many ways, which is a little worse than just saying his spirit is like a child's. Wraith himself says on page 293 that what Daria did by giving him physical form effectively rebirthed him, confirming that this is why his soul is perceived as being similar to a child's. The process basically made him a new person, unmarred by his previous sins. One big issue that I think contributes to the perception of Wraith being a child or childlike, aside from the above quotes, is that we barely see Harrow and Wraith interact with one another before the sex scene. A lot of their relationship development takes place off-screen and is summarized for us. We don't see the conversations and in-depth interactions between the two, so it's hard to tell what grasp Harrow has on Wraith's intellect, especially, again, after she springs him loose from the cage and maybe goes, oh, okay, he's a murder machine. Maybe I was a little bit wrong about his mentality. Remember what I said about factoring the author's writing skills in when I'm considering this criticism? This is what I meant by that. If the author had put more time and effort into developing Harrow and Wraith's relationship prior to the sex scenes, as well as their character overall, she could have shown us that Harrow perceives Wraith as an adult man, which would have made these quotes less impactful. I think that Aurora Ascher, and forgive me, I'm venturing a guess as to what was going on in someone else's head, and that's always tricky territory. I think that she wrote those lines about Wraith's soul and compared him to a child twice, and did not realize that it could be misinterpreted to the extent that some people have misinterpreted it. And if she did have concerns about the wording, I think that she might have assumed that showing us Wraith's perspective, and again, belaboring the point that he is an adult and knows what's going on around him, I think she might have assumed that showing us that would dispel any concerns about his capacity for consent, not considering that the audience might hone in on Harrow or Nashira's perception of him. In short, I don't think Wraith is portrayed as childlike, and I don't think that Harrow views him as a child. I don't think that Aurora Ascher intended to write Harrow as perceiving him as a child. In my opinion, her word choice was very poor, and I also think that her inability to properly develop Harrow and Wraith's relationship added to some readers' perception that he is childlike when he demonstrably isn't. My next issue with this book is the nature of Wraith's culpability, and all of the Wraith's culpability, for that matter, in the massacre of the Seers and any other atrocities committed under Queen Fury. There are some conflicting messages being conveyed to me, and I need to stress that these are messages coming from one single person who the narrative is clearly framing as telling the real truth, and that's Queen Nashira. On page 256, she describes the Wraiths as enchained, enfettered, bound by evil. Where would your mind go if you were sealed in an inescapable prison, and then forced to commit unspeakable acts? Protect yourself first, everyone says. What else to do but turn off the feelings? Otherwise, the pain is too great. She goes on to say, and twisted by their brutal pasts in this life and the one before, they have become even more deadly, though who could blame them after what they've suffered? We're all just trying to survive. Have mercy, child. Have great mercy. Then on the next page, she says, a being with no free will, who'd never experienced the concept, who wasn't even aware of its existence, discovered it the very night he chose to spare the life of an innocent child at great cost to himself. Do you see my issue with this wording? Because on one hand, this seems to be framed as Wraiths are literally trapped by Queen Fury's will. They literally do not have a choice. So be kind and have mercy and forgive them, for they know not what they do. But she also says, if you were in this situation, you would turn off your feelings and save yourself first to survive. So are the Wraiths making a choice to shut themselves down to survive? Or are they helpless slaves to Fury's whims? Furthermore, Wraith was totally unfamiliar with the concept of free will, but that one night he slaughtered all of Harrow's clan, but suddenly discovers he has a choice when he sees her. And here's the thing. I read that scene from Wraith's perspective. This is a rotating perspective book, remember. If it had illustrated a massive agonizing struggle for Wraith, if I had really seen him just gritting his teeth and digging his feet in and saying, no way, I'm not killing a little kid, I fucking refuse. If I had seen him really struggling to resist Fury's orders, I could have said, okay, so he does have free will. But he really has to fight for it. He really has to bust his ass to defy an order, so it's not that simple. Except that isn't what happens. In the chapter that, again, is written from Wraith's perspective, he just decides not to kill Harrow. I'm gonna read it. It's on page 228. He descended as a smoky shadow. The child was his final charge for the night. Perhaps then he could finally rest, free from the relentless compulsion to fulfill his vows. The wraith hesitated outside of her shelter, watching her. She didn't cry, didn't scream. He only needed to stretch a claw forward and stroke her tiny face, and she would burn just like the rest of them. He was bound to do this, powerless to resist. He resisted anyways. That's it. Does he sound conflicted? Does he sound like he's struggling against the weight of Fury's orders? Does it come across like he's fighting tooth and nail to save this innocent child from Fury's wrath? Not to me. The way it's written, it sounds as easy and breezy as goddamn CoverGirl. Now, Wraith does have to struggle when he's trying not to kill Harrow towards the end of the book. But at this point, he loves Harrow. He has a personal interest in not killing her, so he's fighting. He did not have a personal interest in letting her clan and mother live, so he didn't fight the urge to kill them then. My point is that I think the author was going for Wraith literally never had a choice. Sparing Harrow was the one extraordinary act that he had to fight for, except that the way the scene is written and the fact that she additionally characterizes him and other Wraiths later as choosing to bury their emotions and follow orders to avoid punishment makes it come across like he has more agency in his choices than she would like me to believe. Now here's the thing. Even written the way this is, it can still work. I can accept Wraith saying, I kill people because I was too afraid to resist my orders. He has agency in the choice, and this informs my understanding of his character. But if that's the case, I would want to see Wraith struggle more for Harrow's forgiveness. The way Harrow's rejection of Wraith is framed by Nashira is wild. She literally lays into Harrow and says, you're worse than my sisters for abandoning Wraith. You're so mean for fucking rejecting him. Like this motherfucker didn't kill her mom. And Harrow is just so ridiculously overwrought about it. She and Wraith basically fall in insta-love with one another. They bang in a tavern for 5 days, and then she finds out he killed her mom and clan, and then the way she acts afterwards, Jesus Christ, she thinks she abandoned a puppy in a forest full of puppy-torturing monsters. She wails constantly about what a terrible person she is for ditching Wraith. The narrative is clearly pushing me towards Harrow was wrong to abandon Wraith, and damn, I guess I just loved my mom more than Harrow loved hers, because I'm not fucking with it. Finding out that he murdered your mother and extended family is a pretty good reason to ditch his ass. She forgives him way too easily. What I would have liked to see was Harrow having more reservations about Wraith. Like, okay, she loves him, so there's this connection here, but also he murdered her mom, so maybe that connection's a bit more strained now. Maybe she commits to saving him out of compassion and that lingering attraction, but there's more struggle in truly falling in love with him again and forgiving him for what he did. Part of this, again, would rely on Wraith accepting that he chose to save himself over not killing innocent people and begging for Harrow's forgiveness, as well as showing himself to be a new and better person than he was before. Additionally, I want to tack on here that the author is very, very scant and weirdly vague about what Fury did to torture Wraith. It's basically torture! Lots of torture! God, so much torture and pain! If she had put the work into really showing me the horror of what Wraith was subjected to, put effort into explaining how it wore him down psychologically and messed him up and made him compliant to Fury's will, it could improve my understanding of why he would choose to obey her orders instead of, not killing innocent people. But she doesn't. Anyways, those are my two biggest plot-related gripes in this book that I wanted to address. What else? I feel like I had other stuff. Hang on a second. Okay, so there's this really weird trend that I'm finding in my forays into romance and romantasy novels. Basically, you have this guy, the tiny third wheel to the love triangle, you might say. He's the beta to the main male love interest alpha. He's set up as a potential love interest, but really, he doesn't have a chance. He wants the main female character, but he's a little too lukewarm, milquetoast, dispassionate, or pathetic to get her. Sometimes he crosses a boundary that causes the main female character to officially lose any affection she has for him. Sometimes he ends up being obsessive or evil after the rejection. In Fourth Wing, it's Dane. In The Coven and the Curse, it was Iban. In Akatar, Tamlin ended up being a slightly unconventional version of this, in that A Court of Thorns and Roses really goes out of its way to convince you that he and Feyre are the endgame. I feel like I might be forgetting one or two that I've read before, or at least somewhat familiar with, but my point is that Lauren is that guy in Sanctuary of the Shadow. He starts off nice enough, just a human boy that thinks Harrow is a human girl about his age. As this is an elemental circus, he thinks that this is something that connects the two of them. He's being raised by elementals and is surrounded by them every day, and Harrow is theoretically the only other human he's living with. And yet, There are two separate occasions where he opens his mouth and is like, Harrow, Wraith isn't human. He can't be trusted. Then he tries to stop her from setting Wraith free and comes off like a nice guy who's patronizing her because she doesn't know what she's doing, which she doesn't. But overall, it just felt so forced. It felt forced like the way Iban's bullshit in The Cursed was forced. In Fourth Wing and ACOTAR, I can at least argue that the authors put the work in setting up Dane and Tamlin as potential love interests for Violet and Farah. Their betrayals sabotaged their potential as future relationships. But like with Iban, Lauren's little crush on Harrow is just so underdeveloped that this entire scene just hits. I mean, it's pointless. It's pointless in general because there's no relationship really established between Harrow and Lauren. We barely see them interact, so even if we just take it as them falling out as friends, it has zero emotional impact because there's no relationship to be betrayed. And, he doesn't show up in the rest of the book, basically. He exists to get slapped down at the beginning, and then he disappears, so I have no idea what the point of Lauren's character even was. There were also some things that were just... I don't think were thought through very clearly. Well, in my opinion, there was a lot of stuff in this book that was not thought through very clearly, but a specific example of this would be Harrow's age. She's 60 now and appears to be a young woman in her late teens or early 20s, but her mother died when she was 10, except that when Harrow recalls the massacre, she's clearly depicted as being 10 in the way a human girl would be 10. So you aged normally until you were 10, and then your aging slowed? This is just one of those little inconsistencies that bugs me, because I feel like I've seen it in other books or properties before. I can't remember where, but I feel like I have. The author just kind of dodges the question of immortal or long-living beings as children. If you age more slowly than a human, then this would imply that you stay a baby or child for longer, which really doesn't mean that much to an immortal or long-living being because it would be proportional to their lifespan, but it still comes across as awfully inconvenient. I don't know, I just didn't like that inconsistency. If the story was otherwise well-crafted, I could have just kind of shrugged it off as a weird little thing, but given how lackluster it is, I noticed it a lot more clearly. Yeah, that's basically it. The book was lackluster. It was underdeveloped in terms of world building, fantasy, plot, and characters. I'm still bewildered that the Queen's bound Fury off screen at the end of the book instead of it being, I don't know, a major part of the plot. Could have had Harrow uniting them against Fury to save Wraith, but once again, I just don't think the author had a whole lot of fantasy-related writing skills to pull on. And again, I want to emphasize just one more time that is not me saying that Aurora Ascher is a terrible author and that she's always going to be a terrible author. Skills can be developed with time, patience, and diligence, and if she's still writing that sequel to this book, I sincerely hope that she's taken some of the criticism that she's undoubtedly received from this one and is using it to improve her work. But I'm not reading the sequel, so don't fucking ask.